I never thought I'd be the one telling this story. For years, I convinced myself it was better to forget, to bury everything deep inside and pretend it never happened. But the truth is louder than silence. And now, after everything I've endured, I can't stay quiet anymore. Everyone thinks the convent is a sacred place, a holy refuge where only peace and prayer exist. But for me, it became something else entirely. It became my prison, my nightmare, and the place where I lost a part of my soul. People look at me and see a nun calm, composed, obedient, but they don't see the scars I carry. Not the ones on my body, but the ones carved deep into my spirit. Scars I've hidden behind smiles, behind prayers, behind the habit I wore every day. I was supposed to serve God. I was supposed to find love through sacrifice, light through devotion. But instead, I found darkness disguised as holiness, evil wearing a crucifix. And I was too afraid to speak, but not anymore. Today, I'm telling you what happened behind those walls, not because I want pity, not because I'm seeking revenge, but because I know there are others out there, still trapped, still silenced. And maybe, just maybe, if I tell my story, they'll find the courage to escape too. So if you're listening, please, listen closely. What I'm about to share is not easy. It's painful. It's disturbing. And it's real. This is my truth. This is the story they tried to erase. I still remember the day I arrived at the convent. The sun was rising behind the hills, casting golden light over the chapel's stone walls. I had a small suitcase in one hand and a heart overflowing with purpose. I was only 19, and I truly believed, that I was stepping into a life of holiness, of purity, of meaning. I thought I was answering God's call. The world outside had always felt too loud, too chaotic, but here, among the quiet corridors and the whispered prayers, I believed I'd found peace. The other sisters welcomed me with gentle smiles. They called me child and told me I had a beautiful soul. I was assigned to a small, cold room with a single window that looked out onto the garden. It wasn't much, but I didn't care. I felt chosen, blessed. Every morning, I would rise before the sun, kneel on the stone floor, and thank God for guiding me there. I didn't mind the rules, the silence, the long hours of work and prayer. To me, it felt like devotion, like I was cleansing myself from the sins of the world. I remember how the older nuns would touch my face and say I reminded them of themselves when they were young. They said I had fire in my eyes, the kind of fire that could burn away temptation. I believed them. I wanted so badly to be good, to be holy. I would fast for days, scrub the chapel floors until my knees bled, and whisper Hail Marys under my breath every time my thoughts wandered. I thought suffering brought me closer to God, but what I didn't know was that suffering, in that place, wasn't always holy. Sometimes, it was a tool, a weapon, and there were some who used it to hurt, not to heal. I had no idea that within those sacred walls, something wicked was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening. A glance that lingered too long, a hand resting on my shoulder just a second more than it should, words that felt kind, but carried a weight I couldn't explain. It came from Father Emmanuel. He was the confessor for the convent, respected, revered. To everyone else, he was a holy man, a shepherd of our souls. But to me, over time, he became a shadow that never left. He'd call me by my birth name during confessions, something no one ever did. Isabella, he'd whisper. You're special. God has plans for you. At first, I felt honored, seen, maybe even chosen. But then, he started asking questions that didn't feel holy. Do you ever feel lonely here? Do you miss the touch of the world? Do you trust me with your heart? I'd smile nervously and nod, because what else could I do? I didn't want to be disrespectful. He was a priest. One evening, after evening prayers, he approached me in the corridor. The others had already returned to their cells, and the hallway was quiet. He touched my hand and said, If ever you need anything, anything at all, come to me. His fingers held mine for too long. I pulled away, smiling awkwardly, pretending not to notice. But inside, something shifted. A knot formed in my stomach. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But deep down, a voice whispered, This is not right. I tried to talk to one of the senior sisters, Sister Agnes. I told her I felt uncomfortable. that something about Father Emmanuel's behavior didn't sit right with me. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "You must guard your thoughts, child. The devil often tempts us through our imagination." And just like that, the door closed. I walked away in silence, ashamed of even having spoken. I began to wonder, was I the problem? Was I the one being sinful? From that point on, I learned to keep quiet, to smile when spoken to avoid being alone. But no matter what I did, he was always there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. It was raining that night, the kind of cold, heavy rain that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel heavier. I had just finished cleaning the altar after evening mass. The other sisters had already gone to their rooms, and the halls were quiet. I remember kneeling in front of the statue of Saint Mary, whispering my last prayer of the day. That's when I heard his voice behind me, calm, gentle, too gentle. "Isabella. Stay a moment. I need to speak with you." I turned and saw Father Emmanuel standing at the back of the chapel. At first, I thought he had a question about the mass schedule or needed help carrying something. So I stood and followed him without question. He led me to the confessional room, but instead of entering his side, he opened the door to mine and said, "Come sit with me. We don't need the screen today." My heart skipped. Something felt wrong, but I obeyed, because obedience was sacred, because saying no to a priest felt like saying no to God himself. Once inside, the room felt smaller than usual, dim. The single candle flickered between us. He began with questions about my thoughts, my purity, my struggles with desire. I answered each one carefully, nervously, afraid to say the wrong thing. Then his hand reached for mine. I froze. "Don't be afraid," he said. "This is how God heals temptation, through closeness, through trust." He moved closer. His breath touched my cheek. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't know how. And then it happened. He whispered prayers while his hands did things no prayer could sanctify. My body stopped responding. I floated, my mind separating from my flesh like a ghost leaving its shell. I wanted to believe it wasn't real, that maybe this was a test, a nightmare. But when it was over, and he told me not to speak of it for the sake of your soul, I realized something far more terrifying. No one was coming to save me. I left that room broken. I didn't cry, not that night. I simply walked to my cell, closed the door, and stared at the crucifix above my bed. I asked Jesus why he allowed it, why his servant had turned into a monster, but silence was the only answer I got. That night, I died in a way no one could see. People always ask, "Why didn't you run? Why didn't you tell someone?" But they don't understand. Fear doesn't always look like screaming or shaking. Sometimes, fear is quiet. It wraps around you like a veil and convinces you that no one will believe you, that if you speak, you'll only suffer more, that maybe, somehow, it was your fault. And that's exactly what I believed. After that night, I walked the halls of the convent like a ghost of myself. I still sang hymns. I still served in the kitchen. I still smiled. But inside, I was drowning. I told myself it had to be a one-time thing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he would confess, apologize, repent. But days turned into weeks, and the only thing that changed was how easily he looked me in the eyes. How casually he spoke my name, like nothing had ever happened. That's when I realized, he didn't feel guilt, he felt power. And I was powerless to stop him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to write a letter, to run to the Mother Superior, to fall on my knees and beg someone to believe me. But every time I tried to find the words, I saw his face again, calm, holy, convincing. And I remembered how easily people followed him, how much they trusted him. What if they thought I was lying? What if they blamed me? In the convent, purity is everything. I was afraid they'd see me as dirty, impure, tainted. So I did what I had been trained to do since the day I entered that place. I stayed silent. I prayed harder, fasted longer, punished myself for the shame I carried. I even began to believe that maybe God was testing me. Maybe this was my cross to bear. Maybe, just maybe, I was being purified through pain. But the truth is, pain doesn't make you holy, it breaks you. And every time he came near, every time his shadow fell across mine, I felt myself shatter a little more. I stopped writing letters to my family. I stopped laughing. I stopped looking in the mirror, because the girl I used to be, full of hope, full of faith, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't recognize. Still, I stayed, because when you're trapped inside a holy place that's become unholy, the hardest thing in the world is admitting it out loud. I couldn't hold the silence forever. It was eating me alive. My prayers no longer brought peace, they became a battlefield inside my mind. Every Hail Mary felt like a betrayal. Every Amen echoed like a scream I couldn't let out. I knew I had to speak. Even if no one believed me, even if it cost me everything. So one morning, after chapel, I went to see Mother Celinda, superior of our convent. She had always been stern, but fair. I believed, foolishly, that she would listen, that she would see the truth in my eyes. I sat across from her in her office, my hands trembling, my voice barely a whisper. I told her about the confessional, about the things Father Emmanuel had done, about the fear, the shame, the way he used God's name as a weapon. She didn't interrupt me, she just stared. Her face was unreadable. When I finally finished, she leaned forward slowly and said something I will never forget. "Be very careful, Sister Isabella. Accusing a man of God is not only dangerous, it is sinful. Sinful." That word hit me harder than any slap. I begged her to understand. I told her I wasn't lying. But the more I pleaded, the colder she became. She told me I was confused, that perhaps I had misinterpreted his actions, that I needed rest, that my mind was under spiritual attack. Within days, whispers began to spread among the sisters. Eyes that once greeted me with warmth now looked through me, cold, distant, suspicious. I had become the problem. Some of the nuns began avoiding me completely. Others prayed over me as if I were possessed. I was no longer seen as a victim, I was now the scandal, the embarrassment, a soul in need of correction. They stripped me of responsibilities, took away my letters. I was ordered to spend more time in silence and reflection, as if silence hadn't already been my prison. My world became smaller, darker, lonelier. I had finally found the courage to speak, and they buried me even deeper. There's only so much a soul can take before it breaks. And I had reached that point. My silence had become a cage. My prayers had turned into pleas for escape. I wasn't just afraid anymore, I was angry. Angry that they turned away. Angry that God felt so far. Angry that no one saw what was happening. Or maybe they just didn't want to. But the day I found the note under my door, everything changed. It was written in trembling handwriting. A single sentence. "You're not the only one." No name, no explanation. Just that. My heart stopped. Someone else had seen him. Someone else had suffered. I wasn't alone. For the first time, the guilt I had carried like a chain loosened just a little. That night, I waited until the convent was asleep. I crept to the chapel and left a note under the statue of St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. I wrote, "Meet me here, midnight, tomorrow." And I signed it only with the letter I. The next night, I waited in silence, hidden in the shadows. At exactly midnight, she came. Sister Lucia, a novice, barely 18. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She didn't speak, she just nodded, and her hands trembled as she held mine. She didn't need to say anything. I already knew. He had hurt her too. We made a pact right then. We would leave. No matter what it took, we would get out. But escaping a convent isn't like running away from home. There are locked gates, routines, guards, disguised as piety. So we began to plan. Slowly, carefully. Hiding supplies, memorizing guard rotations, saving scraps of food. We communicated through scraps of psalms left in prayer books. Every movement had to be hidden. Every breath, calculated. One mistake, ... and they would bury us for good. But just as we were ready to flee, something happened. Sister Lucia didn't show up for morning prayer, nor for the midday meal. I went looking for her, heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw her, standing with Father Emmanuel in the hallway, her face blank, her eyes hollow. He had gotten to her, broken her, threatened her, and I knew in that moment I had to go alone. So that night, under the cloak of darkness, I slipped out of the chapel, heart racing, rosary clutched tight in my fist. I ran. For the first time in years, I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. When I finally passed through the convent gates and felt the cold air of the outside world on my face, I thought I would feel free. But freedom ... doesn't come all at once. At first, it feels like confusion, like guilt, like fear in a different costume. I didn't know where to go. I had no money, no family nearby, no phone, just a name scribbled on an old envelope. Clara. She had left the convent years ago under mysterious circumstances. They used to speak of her as a cautionary tale, a rebel, a disgrace. But maybe she had just seen the truth before any of us did. I found her in a small town miles away, living quietly, working at a bakery. When she opened the door and saw my face, my habits soaked from rain, my eyes red, my hands shaking, she pulled me inside and didn't ask a single question. She just held me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I cried. Over the next few days, I told her everything, every detail, every bruise, every silence, every unanswered prayer, and she listened, not with pity, but with understanding. She told me I wasn't the only one, that the system was built to protect the institution, not the soul, that many women before me had tried to speak, and most were erased before their voices could echo. Still, I wanted justice. I wanted the world to know. So we went to the diocese. We filed reports. We named names. But do you know what they told me? We'll investigate internally, as if the wolf should investigate the blood on his own teeth. Weeks passed, then months, and nothing happened. No calls, no visits, just silence. Just the same quiet I had escaped from. I tried speaking to journalists. Some were interested, others called it too sensitive. One reporter even asked if I was sure I wasn't misinterpreting the priest's intentions. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I had spent years wondering that exact same thing, and I was done doubting myself. I began writing everything, journals, letters, statements. I published my story online under a different name, and slowly, other voices began to rise. Women I had never met, women from different countries, different orders, but with the same story. And that's when I realized I had escaped the convent. But now, I had to escape the silence that lived outside of it too. There were many nights when I questioned everything, my faith, my worth, my sanity. I looked up at the sky and asked, over and over again, where were you, God, when I cried inside those cold walls, when I was bleeding and no one came, when I screamed in silence? But after all these years, I finally understand. God wasn't the one who abandoned me. People did. Men who wore his name like armor, women who were too afraid to confront evil, an institution that silences pain in the name of preserving power. That wasn't God. That was human cowardice. And now, I no longer confuse the two. I still pray, but not in Latin chants locked behind stone walls. I pray in whispers, in moments of peace, in the breath I take before sharing my truth. I pray for the girls still trapped, for the novices too scared to speak, for the women who've carried this same cross in secret, year after year. And I pray for justice not just in courts, but in hearts, because what happened to me isn't rare, it isn't isolated, and it isn't over. To anyone listening to my voice right now, maybe you've been through something. Maybe you've felt unheard. Maybe you've screamed into a room full of believers and still felt invisible. I want you to hear me. You are not alone. You are not to blame. And you are not without power. Your voice is holy. Your story is sacred. And even if the world doesn't believe you, I do, because I've lived it. I've survived it. And to those who still protect abusers with silence and scripture, your time is ending. The truth is louder now. We are not just survivors. We are witnesses. And we are not going away. Now that you've heard everything, I only have one question for you. A simple question. One I used to ask myself every night, staring at the ceiling in that tiny, cold cell. Do you believe me now? I don't ask it with bitterness. I ask it because, for so long, my truth lived in the shadows, unspoken, ignored, and I know how powerful it is when someone finally listens, really listens. So if you made it this far, if you stayed through my story, then maybe there's still hope that truth still matters, hope that justice begins with awareness. If this story touched you, if something inside you shifted, don't let it end here. Share this video, talk about it, leave a comment and let your voice join mine. You never know who might be reading, who might be sitting in silence right now, waiting for one sign that they're not alone. Be that sign, be that light, because darkness thrives in silence, but light spreads with just one spark. And if you're someone who has lived through something like this, I want you to breathe deeply, right now, in and out, because you made it. You survived. And you're stronger than anyone ever gave you credit for. Let your story be heard whenever you're ready. And until then, you are safe here. You are believed. I know my voice is small in the eyes of the world, but when small voices echo together, they can shake the heavens. So to every soul listening right now, I say this: thank you. Thank you for hearing me, for seeing me, for believing in me when others would not. Now, stay with me, because there's so much more they tried to hide. And I'm not done speaking yet.